Good afternoon, everyone. For anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Amer Hussain. I am with Geosyntec Consultants. We are the engineering consultants for the Tri-County. Welcome. We all appreciate everyone getting. It's a little bit different time for all of us. So appreciate everybody making themselves available. Deanna, before we get going, anything that you want to share with the group as a whole?
No, kind of a small group today, but we're just going to go through the Tulare Lake notice and staff report that we received from State Water Resource Control Board staff. For those of you with property that's in the Tule subbasin and not the Tulare Lake subbasin, this was a precursor to what the Tule subbasin will likely receive in a month or two. So although it doesn't directly affect you at this moment, it's going to be very similar very soon. So again, thank you for joining us today.
Anything on the invoices or the Basin Safe or anything like that you want to? I'll just keep you going while you're. Sure.
Basin Safe invoicing, we have Q2 went out a while ago.
Yeah, Q2 went out.
And we just had generated penalty fees for late invoicing, and as Stacy said, Q3 will go out next month. Not really.
By the way, this is this is not a formal board meeting or anything, so we keep this fairly informal. So if anyone does have any questions, please feel free to ask at any time, or if you want any clarifications on anything. Let's jump into our updates. Susan Long with the Tule Trust is here to give us an update on the trust activities and the MLRP, which is the Multi-Benefit Land Repurposing Program.
Hello, everyone. Before I get started on an update, I'd like to introduce Emily Lopez. She is our new watershed coordinator / project manager. She just started last week, so hopefully next time I'm out that way and able to visit you in person, she'll be with me, so you'll get to actually meet her.
Great.
On the MLRP, on MLRP, I think we had our first advisory meeting last month. Had a very good turnout, about 19 folks. Primary concerns were, a lot of generational farmers wanting to know, what's going to happen. Are they going to be able to maintain their farm for their grandchildren that are wanting to continue farming? Was one big question. The other was who's going to make the decisions when it comes to the projects. And the third was a lot of concern over the subsidence. But it was a good group with a lot of good feedback. It was really a meet and greet opportunity just to kind of touch the surface and get them kind of on board to what we're looking for and what we're going to be doing as this group. We have set our first workshop date, which will be November the 9th at 6 p.m. And that will be at the Tipton Memorial Hall. Flyers are forthcoming. They're almost done. So as soon as that's done, they will be sent out to you as well as posted on our website and social media, what have you. These are public workshops. There will be two. There will be one for the DAC, so community at large, and then for landowners and growers as well. So mine is on the 9th for the landowners and growers, and the DAC's is on the 8th at 6 p.m. And theirs is at the Pixley substation. I'll forward you their flyer. I do have theirs. It's done. So that way you'll have that if you know any residents that would like to attend. This will be very general, high level stuff about what MLRP is, just kind of that initial education to the public and getting some feedback on what they want to see, what their thoughts are at this point. On the ag advisory side, on the ag workshop, we will also be looking for some feedback on what they would like to see that would help in identifying types of projects. We are working on some mapping, I don't want to say software, but a tool, a mapping tool, and it's in process. So just making sure we have the proper layers of to identify the different topics others would want to see. So that's pretty much where MLRP is.
Susan, may I
Lynn.
ask, with the advisory committee, you said that they had some questions or some feedback on subsidence. What was the general questions or tone on subsidence with the group?
The main concern is what are we going to do about it, and it's really the east side, in eastern Tule is really where the biggest concern along Bryant, and recognizing that they're getting already close to what their max limits are and what that's going to mean for them. And so I've had a couple of calls from folks from eastern Tule with some ideas, and I'm actually going to be attending some irrigation district specific meetings in regards to that. They have some ideas that they just need somebody to help facilitate moving something forward.
Great, very good. Thank you.
That's
You're welcome.
great. Yeah, that's great. That really shows that people are starting to think through some of these issues, and that's really good news to hear that. Unfortunately, I don't think the rest of my presentation is going to be all that great news, so it's nice to see some.
Have some positive.
Yes, have some positive, because I feel like I've been the bearer of bad news for a lot of people in the last few weeks. But yeah, thank you, Susan. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Good. All right. Update on the Tule subbasin. So we did this kind of for a reason, because a lot of the stuff that Susan just mentioned is what we're talking about in the Tule subbasin. And I'm going to share some information with this group that is kind of the sausage being made. And you're going to hear some working drafts. So I want to emphasize to everybody that the things that I'm presenting to you are not final. They are the current thinking and some of our issues that we're trying to work through. So we had a meeting last Friday. This is literally hot off the presses, with just the technical group, and it was the issue of subsidence. And the focus was very much on mitigation. How are we going to mitigate? Where are we going to mitigate? How much is that mitigation going to cost? Those types of things. And so the approach was that we would identify the areas that had infrastructure that needed to be protected, and then we would figure out how much subsidence is going to occur in that area, and then determine how much mitigation dollars would be necessary. So that was, and the area that was identified is primarily on the western side of the subbasin, and encompasses very much the north Tri-County areas, including the Angelo Wellfield. And very similar to what they've done along the Bryant Current Canal, they were going to set up, this is an area where they were going to set up zones for subsidence, and specifically address subsidence in that area with limits on pumping, and limits on subsidence in that area. We have, we meaning Tri-County, have some very serious concerns that areas that have have just as much subsidence that are located within the subbasin are not included in that area of that zone, that subsidence zone, subsidence management zone, I think is how we're calling it. And that there would be no restrictions on pumping in those areas. So we have some very serious concerns on this approach. We are, okay, we're trying to work our way through some of those issues. There is a meeting coming up with the state. I don't remember the exact date in front of me. I believe it's the 13th or something like that. I don't remember the exact date. It doesn't matter. The idea was to present some of this information at that meeting. We've asked that this not be done and that additional time be taken to further evaluate some of these issues and determine if those management areas need to be expanded or done away with completely, and it really should encompass more of the subbasin itself where the subsidence, issues are actually occurring. So we are in the process of preparing some comment letter back to the subbasin and the technical team, and expressing some alternative methods of maybe calculating some of these values or what the management area should encompass. Frankly, we don't think that this program is going to address all of the subsidence issues that are necessary to get the plan approved by the state. And again, you're getting a bit of the sausage being made, right? So I just want to share that. I just want to make sure that everybody in the group knows that we're not, these are not final evaluations. These are not what's actually going to go in the final report. It is ongoing discussions with what's going on. So literally the good news is we're getting closer on the groundwater levels issue, although there's still some more to be done there as well. And then the only other issue that remains, of course, is deciding what to do on water quality. And the Tule subbasin, at least, did not get water quality comments from DWR. So we're going to touch upon water quality and maybe some of my opinions on that in the Tulare Lake portion of this. But I did want to make sure that everybody was aware that, the ongoing discussions on the Tule subbasin. There are, on the water level side, we continue to discuss the mitigation and how we're going to, domestic well mitigation, and how we're going to fund that. That hasn't been fully ironed out just yet as well, and we're still debating that. In a few minutes, I'm going to get into the Tulare Lake comment letter that we received and the notification that we received for the probationary hearing. The Tule subbasin has not received that letter. They have not received their notice on probation just yet. We have not been told exactly when we will receive that letter. In the past, they were expecting to do Tule about 1 month after the Tulare Lake. We don't know if that's still the case or not anymore, but that's kind of where we're at on the Tule subbasin. Questions? I'm looking at Carlo and Mike because they're in the room with me, and they're usually not shy about that. Any questions on Tule before I move on? And if there's any terms or anything that I use that someone's not 100% familiar with, please let me know, and I'll be happy to explain any of that or elaborate on any of that.
You mentioned this area, subsidence area.
The management area, yeah.
In Tri-County, where there's areas that you think has also experienced similar subsidence that's not included? Yeah,
so the way that it was drawn, it encompasses mostly the portions of Tri-County and portions of lower Tule ID, but picks Dixley and other areas were completely excluded from that. And then there's a little bit around Alpha for the issue of the pumping into Pullman Canal from Deer Creek. So they basically identified flooding on the very northern tip of Lower Tule. They identified the flooding that occurred in this area, and they identified the high-speed rail and the railroad lines as areas that needed to be protected, as infrastructure that needed to be protected. And for Deer Creek, or the Deer Creek Stormwater District, I should say, they specifically asked for additional lift pumps to take water out of Deer Creek and put it into the Homeland Canal. And those were the critical infrastructures areas that were identified, and that's where some of these management areas were drawn.
Okay.
The quiet group today, so please, if anyone does have any questions, otherwise I'm going to move on to Tulare Lake and talk a little bit about the letter that we received from Tulare Lake and what we would expect something similar to come to the Tule subbasin as well. All right, I'm getting a nod that says move on. Everybody wants to go home today. Okay, so yeah, so a couple things just as a preamble. Again, I'm going to take what is essentially 176 pages of a draft staff report that the State Water Board staff prepared as a draft comment to us. And I'm going to take all of that down to 5 slides. Yeah, or 6 slides, something like that, 5 or 6 slides, right? So 170, I'm not going to ask you, but I do want to point out that the probationary hearing for Tulare Lake is scheduled right now for April 16th up in Sacramento. I'm going to talk about some key dates that came out of the probationary hearing notice. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the draft staff report as well. On Thursday of the week before, the State Water Board essentially released the probationary hearing notice. They released a draft staff report. They released a executive summary, which is, I believe, about 7 pages long. So if you don't get a chance to read anything else, I would highly recommend taking a look at the staff or the executive summary. And then they released what they called an Appendix A, where they listed in a nice matrix form all of their deficiencies. These include the DWR deficiencies that have been previously identified by Department of Water Resources. They also included additional deficiencies that the State Water Board has identified. And then the last column, which is the important one, is they gave a nice summary of all the potential actions. So I do think one thing that I would compliment the State Board on is that the potential actions that were listed were actually meaningful, detailed, and had some good directions to them to help us move forward in getting out of probation and getting a document that can be approved by the state. So I would, as much as you're going to hear me complain about some things, I do have to compliment the State Board on listing those potential actions. All this information is available on, next slide, no, actually this is fine. So all of the information that you're going to see is available on the State Water Board's Sigma portal, not the DWR Sigma portal that many of you have been used to going to previously. The State Water Board has their own Sigma portal, and if you go down through it, you might have to scroll down a bit on the front page, but you will find there under announcements release of the Tulare Lakes, draft staff report. There are several workshops coming up, not to be confused with Susan's workshops, although they are in the same time frame. So apparently any of you that have a lot of free time are going to be in a lot of workshops over the next 2 weeks. So there is a virtual workshop that is scheduled for the 3rd of November from 11 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. So again, there's a link to that workshop on the State Water Board's site. It's also, if any of you did receive a notice, if any of the pumpers who might have received a notice, there's a link there. And if anyone is having difficulty finding that, just get a hold of Deanna and she'll be happy to, or Stacy, and they'll be happy to send it to you. There is an in-person workshop on the 8th in the evening from 6 to 8:30 p.m. at the Civic Auditorium in Hanford. And I understand that the board, in both of these cases, will be making about, plus or minus an hour presentation, and then they'll be opening it up for about an hour and a half of public comments. I would encourage, and the comments are going to be on the draft staff report, which we're going to talk about in more detail here in a bit. So they want to present what their findings are and their recommendations moving forward of that draft staff report. I think they're also going to spend a little bit of time talking about the process moving forward and the probationary process. I would highly, highly, highly encourage all of you, both if you represent a district or you sit on a board and as individuals, to comment on the draft staff report, whether you can do it in person or at the workshops, or you can send written comments via email, or even there's a mailing address too for those of you that prefer to do it that way. I cannot stress enough the importance of them hearing your voice, your concerns, your positive things that you might think that it needs to be addressed in the report, or the things that you feel need to be changed and modified accordingly. I'm looking at a sea of unhappy faces. And then the probationary hearing, this is the state.
One comment I'd make on that, Amir, I think it's gonna be important because they hear from all the GSAs and stuff. We need to really encourage and educate the farmer types, even small farmers, because I think their ears are gonna be more tuned in to people that are gonna be truly impacted rather than those of us who are supposed to be managing this, right, that they're not happy with.
I agree with that 100%. And, I said that at the Tulare Lake Managers meeting. I hope all of you are getting your landowners together and maybe providing them with some talking points or having some discussions with them so that they can go and have meaningful conversations at the Civic Center, particularly in person, or online. But I think it's going to be very important, and I'm not sure how engaged some of the landowners have been on Tulare Lake side. I think this is a problem for the Tulare Lake subbasin. Much more so than other subbasins. The Tulare Lake subbasin, I don't think that the landowners have been very engaged thus far.
But not only, because I think the small family farmer probably will have a big voice there about, a lot of them are just gonna flat out to throw in the towel once this gets implemented, and then people from the working class that are working on these farms, on how many people are gonna lose their jobs once this is done. So it seems to me those are gonna be the two most important for them to get things in perspective. It's easy for the board staff to say, you guys need to go do this, but the real people that are gonna get harmed, they've been pretty silent so far.
Yes, and I don't know if you've heard any, comments from the letter. I know that, Mid-Kings River has been getting concerned calls about the letter, but, nobody's called me yet, so I would have thought we would have more engagement once that letter went out. I think it'll be very different again on the Tule side, but Tulare Lake for me has been pretty quiet so far.
It was only 2.5 hours, and you said they were gonna present for an hour of it. It shouldn't be that difficult to get more than fill up that amount of time.
Well, I certainly hope you're right. I certainly hope you're right. I do have some concerns that, Deanna's already voiced about lack of engagement. And I think it's important that it's not just, you and Mike have both been very engaged in this process. You guys know it. But I'd like to make sure that they're hearing from small farmers and other people that are truly going to be impacted. Livelihoods depending on the agricultural community. I think it's critical that they hear from that group rather than seem to represent those of us who live here. That's a nice way of saying that. Okay. All right, so let's get the probation hearing. As I said, it's April 16th. We don't have a lot of details just yet as to what that process is truly going to look like, and as we do get that, we'll share more of those details with this group as well. Okay. We talked about the draft staff report. And I mentioned the fact that it is available on the SGMA portal. The bottom line recommendation from the state staff to the board is that they recommend that the board place Tulare Lake on a probationary status. They identified those three main deficiencies, which are similar to the deficiencies that DWR had previously identified. They did elaborate some more on each one of those, and we're going to get into that in a second. And then they had a couple additional recommendations as well, which we're also going to talk about. Okay, so the first deficiency, and there's multiple parts to each one of these, is the groundwater levels. They still don't feel, and I'm not going to read every one of these to you, but I'll hit some highlights. They don't feel like we've completely identified all of the impacts to the users on the undesirable results. That one of the things that they have said in writing to us as one of their potential actions is that you need to go out and have more meaningful engagement. Now, I think that's the exact words that they use, and come up with some consensus with the users, water users in the area, and incorporate their findings and document some of those meetings in the document itself, in the report itself. So I'll give you a brief example. In our previous document, we mentioned the fact that we met with all these flood control agencies, and we listed all the different flood control agencies at the state level and the local level, and we said, hey, we talked to all these people, and then, here's what we're doing about it. And they dinged us on the fact that we didn't actually say what our outcome of those meetings were, what their concerns were, what they identified, and what they asked us to address. So there are things like that you'll notice that on all three of these that they've asked us to go back and have those quote-unquote meaningful engagement. They do feel that there's still some data gaps in the water budget. And when I say water budget, it literally is what you're thinking is the accounting for the water coming into the subbasin, the groundwater, and how that's all the different sources of that water coming in, the rivers, flow from other subbasins, from surrounding subbasins, all of the rainfall, precipitation, all of that versus the water that we're taking out. And they feel like there's still some data gaps, and they identified specific data gaps in their potential actions that they want us to address. They definitely want us to expand the monitoring network, not just the number of wells, but how often we monitor groundwater levels in them. So while they don't go into specifics, they do want to make sure that we identify, that we are sampling all the different aquifers in sufficient value to be able to evaluate all of those impacts that I mentioned previously.
On that question of monitoring, they specifically in the report said, and they didn't say it whether negatively or positively, but they specifically said Tri-County and Southwest Kings do not have the fewest monitoring sites. We've explained to them the reason that is previously, but what do you think our way forward with that question is? I mean, do you think we're still explaining to them? Do you think we need to say, yeah, it's data gaps and we have to fill them, or?
I think we need to explain to them, but we need to show them the lack of wells, in that area, and I think a few more maps showing the fact that we just don't have extraction wells in this area.
With respect to Southwest Kings in particular, you should show them the lack of groundwater below the
Yes.
Therefore, you don't have very many wells to monitor the groundwater that isn't there.
Yeah, there isn't there, yeah.
We did that in the plan, and we have the de-designated area, we have all this hatched area, we've tried to articulate that previously, but
Even on the de-designated area, Carlos, they said, yeah, this zone and this zone, all this is de-designated, but this down here is not, so you need to monitor that. And we're like, they're confined aquifers.
yeah, there's no wells there.
They're not going dry.
Yeah, that's over the area south of Utica, Southwest Kings.
Yeah.
Used to watch people go try to farm it. The Siders did.
Yeah.
Later, Henrich came along, but in order to solve, I used to laugh at how this fellow is gonna solve this water problem. He solved it by buying other land and moving water there. There's no groundwater lying beneath that ground.
Right.
Why is that so hard of a concept for the regulators to understand?
Yeah, it's an ongoing challenge. I will say, and just to be clear to everybody on the call, as well, these comments were based strictly on the 2020 GSP and the 22 addendum. All of the discussions, and we've met with them 6 times, Carlos, that those were, anything that we've given them since the 22 document were not taken into account when they wrote this. It was strictly based on the 2 GSPs that they have to date. And so it's clear that in some cases we just need to elaborate some more and make sure that some additional details are presented.
For sure, that needs to be a comment, that in person. Somebody needs to bring that up.
Yeah,
It's
good
that
point.
comment at that public meeting,
Good point.
not just in written comments.
The other thing, Amir, because I was directly involved with that de-designation,
Yeah.
the reason that the state board went along and went through Stevie Salt's, that de-designation, the goal of that was this would be the salt disposal area in the future.
Yeah.
And that water, there was no beneficial use, because of the existing quality, there's no beneficial use either for domestic, or industrial, or ag left in that. And that the only reason they let us de-designate it is because of the barrier that you wouldn't contaminate the water below. So that, now you got the state boards looking at this, the guys don't understand what the left hand did over here, and the right hand saying something directly contrary.
Yeah.
But if they go in all that record, that was really the basis for the de-designation.
We're gonna get into the water quality section, Mike, but literally in that conversation we had with the state board, if you recall, they said that one of their concerns is the compounds from that the constituents from these designated area being pulled out of that area and migrating to somewhere else.
Laterally, 'cause
Yeah,
going down, it ain't gonna happen.
Yeah, laterally,
Why
yeah.
we had to do all those studies, but
yeah.
that
But-
seems kinda contrary, because it's all pretty shallow,
And
till you get right in the middle of the lake.
And they pretty much admitted that they hadn't been in discussions with CV Salt, and so we are expected to explain the CV Salt operations and timeline to the state board who's responsible for CV Salt.
Yeah.
I mean, because Mary Few, for example, I remember when we were dealing with like the Stratford area,
Mm-hmm.
that de-designation area, it went, I think it was like only 60 or 80 feet that it was de-designated to on the fringe, versus in the middle, I think it was down to 600 feet.
Yeah, yeah,
So
that
that's
sounds
what,
right.
logically, that's, again, doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah. No, I agree, Mike. It's a challenge. It's almost like you have to say something, prove it, and then reiterate that this is what this means. That's the kind of the feeling I got sometimes when I was reading this. I had a few choice words as I was reading it.
Well, I would recommend on that issue, Stevie Salt is still active, so they ought to be engaged in that.
Absolutely. Yeah, we definitely have engaged, CV Salts. And that whole, King's, Water Alliance, I believe, is the right, group. Okay, so, well impact mitigation program. So one of the things that we, in the 22 addendum, was we would include a well, mitigation program, and we presented the framework for that in the 22 document. They want details, and they want lots of details, and more importantly, they want to know that the funding is secure, and it will be adequate to cover the number of wells that we have said would be impacted by whatever water levels we set. So they've laid out some pretty clear expectations. They also make it clear and repeat that the SAFER funds that the state has made available for, wells that have been impacted are intended for quote-unquote legacy issues and are not to be used by us as a funding source for these well impacts.
They also wanted us to include other types of wells.
Yes,
Staff
yes,
report, which
not just domestic
was
wells.
somewhat surprising to me that they wanted,
Yeah.
every type of well
Yeah,
to be included in the mitigation.
and they, if you do read the 176 pages, it does spend a number of pages bringing in lots of other state board policies. So as laws have been passed in the state board has passed policy in support of those, human right to water. Even though there's legislation, there's also state board policy. So they tie a lot of these state board, policies and goals that the state board has, back into the SGMA program.
Amir, is there any human obligation to common sense?
Apparently not, Carla. Apparently not. You do, again, I would bring you back to, I remember who, you weren't in the room, sorry, John Gephardt's comment about, you live in California. So, apparently not.
That's actually not a bad response. I understand it.
Yeah, human right to water, and there's also some board goals that are mentioned about, equity in some of those issues. So again, I would encourage everyone, if you have the time, to read the full document, but, please be aware that there are a number of other board goals and policies that are being.
I went to the water board site while you were talking, and it immediately pulls up all those policies you're talking about. So you can, racial equality, the right to water, and then also mention the Tulare
Yeah.
Lake. So it's right up there up front, so it's very easy to access.
swell mitigation program is what they're looking for, and especially focused on the funding. They also, have some commitments to managing demand. And this is where they do get into groundwater allocations. Only 2 of the 5 GSAs in Clear Lake have allocations right now. Some of the other ones are working on them.
Who's the second one? El Rico adopts theirs?
But, and Troy County already has one, as this group probably well knows. But they do go in and emphasize the importance of some of that. They don't list it as a mandatory, but they do, their expectation is that you're gonna find a way to manage demand.
Basin-wide, is what
Basin-wide,
it said.
yeah, basin-wide.
The key to that was,
basin-wide.
not as they said that it seemed that it was, since it was up to individual areas, it seemed almost voluntary,
Yeah,
and they wanted to see it basin-wide.
yeah.
I mean, it's actually not as far off observation from my perspective. That observation's not absolutely incorrect. That's a correct observation. It's a correct observation for the Tule Subbasin as well. We did not do it as a basin-wide, demand management, and therefore, individuals are, subject to their own interpretation of what that means. Individual areas, I should say.
One of the things that's prevalent throughout this entire section of the groundwater levels is the importance of getting a well registration program and really understanding where the wells are, how deep they are, how many are still active, how many new ones have gone in, how deep they are, and what aquifer they're pumping from. Really getting a handle on that. That's probably the number one thing that the state board has dinged us on in Tulare Lake, and I think, and this is my personal opinion on Tule, is going to get the similar type of comments. Really understanding where you're getting water out of and how much from each of them. Charlie, you can't keep looking at me like that.
All right, I'll look at Steve.
All right.
For Kathy.
You look at me, I'm looking away.
Finally, they asked about doing a better job of coordinating the groundwater levels that we are selecting with all of the other sustainability indicators. So if we select a groundwater level and we're saying this is where we want the water level to be, are we causing problems for change in storage, for subsidence, what do they call it, the ground interconnected streams, right? So they want us to make sure that we're looking at all of the sustainability indicators once we take a water level and making sure that those water levels are not going to be causing impact to other sustainability indicators. Again, I'm summarizing 176 pages on just a few slides, so please keep that in mind. And I think that some of the potential actions, which I'm not really getting into, are important as well. All right. Land subsidence. Similar to what I've already said on groundwater levels, they wanted to make sure that we're talking to the people being impacted by land subsidence, that we're clearly identifying impacts of land subsidence and conditions that are occurring where land subsidence would be causing those impacts. They also wanted to make sure that we have some very clear quantitative criteria, meaning that we specify clearly what level, what rate of land subsidence is going to avoid those undesirable results and total subsidence. So we need to make sure that both of those, the sustainable management criteria for land subsidence is not necessarily a water level, but it is a rate of subsidence and a total amount of subsidence. asked us to make sure that we consult with the flood management agencies, the flooding issues, obviously with the year that we just had, and some of the, flooding events that we had were very much on their mind when they wrote this. That's very clear. Again, I previously mentioned that, you know, we got dinged a little bit for saying we talked to them, but we didn't specify exactly what they told us. And then they want to see us planning ahead to avoid subsidence, meaning, they want to make sure that the steps that we're taking are actually slowing subsidence, and in their mind, they'd like to see is at a point where no subsidence is occurring at all. This poses, real challenges. I spent some time earlier talking about the fact that Tule had taken the approach that, you know, they were gonna mitigate many of these things. My feeling right now is that we are looking more at, what kind of pumping we need to be at. And I realize we're not gonna get to, just by pumping alone, we're not gonna get to zero subsidence, so that we're gonna have to accept some level of subsidence, and then mitigate for that, but not at the current level of subsidence, but, you know, some less than that, with less impacts, less mitigation. But it also means less pumping, so it's a trade-off. That's going to be, an ongoing discussion that we're gonna have to have with all the GSAs, and where those impacts are occurring. Pumping needs to be, reduced across the subbasin. I think Tule's gonna probably be looking at similar type of comments as well on this one. All right.
Is that predictable? Really, is the rate of subsidence predictable? I'll explain what I'm asking. I believe that the subsidence is caused as we pull the water table down. The clay zones that used to be saturated are now higher, and the water is slowly moving out. Pumping, I think we'll still experience subsidence a period of time. Is it really, do we know enough about how that's occurring that we can actually predict the
You know,
rates
one
of
thing I
subsidence?
will say though, Carlo, is on Cross Creek, you know, when we were monitoring you around there, when the year when it was real wet, 27, when that pumping stopped, that subsidence went down to like, I think 2 inches. And then the next year when it started pumping again, it was back up to, 12 inches, 14 inches. I was kind of shocked, because I thought the same thing. It would take a lot longer to see the differential when you're stopping the pumping, just because it's gonna keep compressing, but it was, you know, pretty
Then I'll say it this way, those MOs, did you call them, management?
Threshold?
Or the management
we're gonna
areas,
set some,
yeah.
we're gonna try to stabilize the water table at some level. By doing that, we'll be over the long term draining an area above, unless it's high enough that all the draining has been done, you know. It seems like a complicated technical problem with a lot of unknowns. You know, that there's gonna be some good engineering, but there's also gonna be some good horseback guessing. I get the feeling that some of this, they have a bias, they clearly have a bias. And, you know, that's gonna be a challenge to overcome, we're gonna have to overcome it.
Carl, honestly, I don't think that they expect us to have all of the answers, but I do think they expect us to have taken a very serious look at it. And what their criticism of our previous has been that you have, reviews haven't been robust as they should be. And we never, in any of the previous documents, we never actually said that, hey, if this continues at this rate, we're gonna have to reduce pumping. We don't actually, we kind of imply it, but we don't actually come out and say it. And, I think they're looking for more commitment on an actual management
I think
strategy.
they think that it's gonna bias that I'm
Yeah.
referring to.
Yeah,
They,
yeah.
they don't wanna, if this happens, we'll do this. They want you to do it now because,
Well, I think some
I
of
know.
the highlighted, Carlo, when you see the lake tilt on that, and that's where there's a big difference there between avoiding and mitigating. Now, there's certain people who are on the phone saying, well, that's okay, we'll just keep raising our ditch banks and we'll keep having somebody raise a levee out there, but I just don't think that's gonna fly. I think avoid is what they're looking for.
Yes, they use very specific language. Mike, yes, we're gonna have to mitigate some things. They actually use the word mitigation for subsidence, which is unfortunate, but I don't think you're gonna be able to get out of, when you get a plan that's only focused on mitigation.
No, I agree. It's not gonna happen.
Yeah, I think you have to be, real with the fact that certain volume of water can be extracted below the clay, below that rate of subsidence. We've said that, at some point in Tri-County, we're gonna have that we're gonna take that groundwater pumping allocation and have it above and below the clay. Most of our pumping is probably below the clay anyways, but, we're probably gonna be looking at, some of those type of issues out here. And Tulare Lake, for sure, there's many parts of Tulare Lake that they're gonna have to do that. I think Westland, one of the reasons they did get approved is they actually dealt with this issue and did come up with that. Second thing, quite frankly, is they know where their wells are and they know how much they're pumping from below the clay. Boy, I wasn't kidding when I said this wasn't gonna be a happy meeting. Boy,
Grim,
I'm not.
grim report.
Grim report, okay. Third,
It's gonna get a lot more grimmer in the future.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's like really grim,
Wait till April.
Yeah. So, I'm gonna make a general comment about the groundwater quality section. It turned out by coincidence, we got this released on a Thursday. Strictly by coincidence, we had a meeting already pre-scheduled that had been scheduled several weeks ago with the state board that following Monday. So there was a day in between, one working day, and then we had this meeting. And that meeting was specifically intended to be about water quality. And I will say that it became very apparent that the state board's view is that the GSA is responsible for groundwater quality issues occurring after 2015. So if things are getting worse in an area, if new problems are being identified, groundwater quality problems, if plumes, existing plumes that may have existed before 2015, but now are starting to expand into new areas, those are all responsibility of the groundwater agency, of the groundwater sustainability agency. That felt very much like a huge expansion of the responsibilities of the GSAs. And there were several of us that pushed back at that meeting. But it became clear, Mike, you were there, so if you want to add anything, I was pretty disappointed in what I thought was a role and the way I read the legislation and what clearly the state board staff. So there is going to be, in some of the comments that we are going to provide, there's going to be some discussion on that issue as well. I think many of the GSAs have their legal departments looking at these. That was probably a major takeaway that I got from this document, that I was like, wow, okay. Some of the other things were not great, but they were not unexpected. This one and the expansion of the responsibilities of the GSAs related to groundwater quality, I thought was hugely problematic. Okay, quickly, I'm probably taking up way too much of your guys' time on this, but
It was really hard to separate out what could be happening. You got the salt and nitrate management plan,
Yeah.
you know, from somebody else putting more contaminants in the water, and then us taking the blame for that, when
Right.
it doesn't really have a, maybe not directly tied to the groundwater level. That, yeah, and they went back and forth. I was trying to figure out how they were gonna sort out who was responsible for what.
Right.
I don't know, that's gonna be a tough one.
Yeah, it is.
I will say that on this groundwater quality section, it read very much like somebody else had written this section of the letter, of the report, I shouldn't say the letter, but the report. They didn't go into nearly as much detail in this section as they did in some of the others. And so what you see as a summary on the screen is reads very much like what DWR has previously said to us. But one of the things that they specifically did not like in Sawyer Lake is we had said that we are going to use the maximum contaminant level, which is the drinking water standards for contaminants. And they wanted us also to make sure that we looked at some of the water quality objectives that the state board has identified, the regional boards have identified in their plans. And they were also very particular about the fact that the time frame that we use has to stop at January 1st of 2015, because while we're not responsible for anything before that, we are responsible if things are getting worse or have increased after that 2015 deadline. So when you see a lot of those first three bullet items, it really is it kind of feels like reading the same thing, because they very much did not like the time frame that we used. We used all the way up through 2020, and they also didn't like the fact that in some cases we weren't monitoring, the frequency of the monitoring program was not sufficient for them. So when you do read that section, it reads very repetitively over and over about those two facts. Again, they want us to expand the water quality monitoring network quite a bit. They are talking about taking samples at least on a semi-annual basis, if not quarterly. And that's a mindset, that comes from some of the hazardous waste and landfill business where, those are maybe a few dozen acres sites at the most, right? We're talking, 500,000 acres in Sawyer Lake, and something like that. And we're like, this is insane. I mean, you can't put that kind of requirement on a program that's these big regional programs. So I think we're going to push back on several of those items as well. The last bullet item kind of pertains to the fact that when a issue is identified, they want to make sure that there's a program to collect numerous and additional sampling after that problem is identified, and that sampling program continues as well. Again, a lot of these read like, hey, this is a huge expansion of the responsibility of the GSA. And related to water quality, we're not the water board. We pay a state agency for this, all of us do, and it felt like they were almost turning each GSA into a mini water board. We're not 20-person agencies, right? I mean, one or two people agencies.
I don't think they care about
I don't think they care. Yeah, they don't care.
Mayor, how do we monitor water quality in this basin at this?
So in Sawyer Lake, we have 34 monitoring locations that we've identified, and
These are wells?
these are wells.
They will take water samples.
Yeah. Some of them are city wells and things that the city already has an existing program that they monitor. Some of them are monitoring wells, and some of them are ag wells. We got some pushback on there weren't enough shallow wells that would specifically be where
City of Corcoran. City of Corcoran has wells that are perforated below the clay.
Yes.
They have wells that land in the clay and are perforated above the clay. Actually, think they have a couple of wells that are perforated both above and below the clay. So
They
probably shouldn't talk too much about that. But, and those wells take care of 12,000 people.
Yeah.
You know, maybe 8 or 10 wells. What are you talking about? Wells that people's domestic wells.
Yeah,
Is that the guy that goes and drills a 30-foot well and thinks he can beat the system? You know, we pay it, you know, it's just what water meters say. We pay a fairly serious amount of money for that water, those wells. I mean, why are some people exempt from participating in civilized society?
Well, maybe I said that poorly, Carl.
I might have said my thoughts a little bit on the rough way too, but.
But I think, you know, the cities and the municipalities absolutely have a monitoring program already. They're already regulated by Division of Drinking Water. The rural domestic wells that are located out there, a person has a small community that may not be an incorporated city. Cattleman City, for example, is just a incorporated city. So some of those and the domestic landowners, what the board felt like is we didn't have enough monitoring wells in those areas to be able to say if any of the shallow domestic wells would also be being impacted by water quality issues. That's what they're asking us to do. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to go out and drill new wells. It just means we have to be able to get some landowners or a series of landowners who might be willing to allow us to sample their
water and take it to a lab.
Yeah, but again, we're not sampling everybody. We're strictly trying to find a representative location and say, this well represents this area.
And if I might speak just a little bit to Cattleman City, they're notoriously poor groundwater conditions.
Yeah.
But County of Kings contracted initially for 1,000 acre feet of state water project.
Yeah.
Awarded 900 acre feet annually to them. They built a treatment plant.
Yeah.
I think they built.
Yeah, they did.
It is built.
Yeah.
And they still have to utilize a little bit of groundwater. But I remember in my hometown, Progressive Bay Area, no less, we had a septic tank, but when a sewer system was built, we were mandated to get on board. Some of these solutions where people have a little well 100 feet deep in an area with notoriously poor groundwater is not to keep trying to fix the quality of the groundwater, but get them to join with the rest of the community of Kettleman. And
I agree.
I mean, that is a real issue, because, even Little Easton, when I was working up with the Upper Kings.
I think Dinuba, we could throw Dinuba in this too.
Yeah, and they don't, and right now, Fresno State and some other folks are putting together a proposal on utility consolidation in Allensworth. And it's just, the frustration is there, I think, with people that want to help do that. They don't want to consolidate. Easton was adamant that they were not going to consolidate with Fresno or with, FID or anybody on, they still want to have their wells, they still want to have their septic. But I think eventually, it may not be an option.
So consolidation is a state goal.
Yes.
And I think when you're talking about mitigation and different things, it's my belief that we can show that if consolidation was an option and they opted out of that, that they disqualify themselves from mitigation.
I was just gonna say it my
Yeah.
way.
But,
Yeah,
I mean,
I got in the.
that makes a lot of
and the
sense.
way that works
Yeah.
is consolidation is a state goal. So I
Yeah.
think if you can find a way to consolidate for at no cost to that person and get them consolidated with a system and they refuse that consolidation, then from my perspective, that's disqualification.
It's
So
kind of
rather
like
than the
time here that you
Yeah,
give up those.
That's right.
rather than it being a mandate, it is the option, and then if they decline.
Yeah, then you're on your own.
Yeah.
we'll see if that holds up.
Yeah, that's the way I come out
When
at it.
you get, statewide or
Yeah.
large area wide, it is difficult, but really sometimes that's a far better solution. In my hometown, we were far better served to be connected to the cities. Imagine having
True.
Mike with a septic tank, us connected to the system, Deanna with a septic tank.
Right.
No, even allocating the cost over the area because the system.
That's cheap to build. Okay,
Having done a
yeah.
few of those types of projects of consolidation, both for sewer and wells, the bigger obstacle I've seen with the residents is, one, they don't understand that they're already paying for it. They oftentimes think that, well, they have it, it's free to them, it doesn't cost them anything. So they don't understand that concept. And then you're right, Deanna, the connection piece of it, that expense is a piece that they're not often, if their system's working, they're not often willing to take on. So being able to show them that the cost of having access to a municipal water source versus and sewer system versus what they currently have is important, I think. And then having programs to help them get connected.
Yeah, I can tell you, see, some of the funny, not funny, but the stories we saw, some of these like 15 mobile home
Yes.
situations, they have 15 septics, one shallow well right there, and then they're complaining about nitrates.
Nitrate.
I'm like, who's causing the problem?
Right. Yeah. That whole issue, Mike, you just nailed it, this is why, we are not set up to be a water quality agency, and not sure.
On that one, after we say our piece, maybe kind of, look for help with the legislature if they try to make the GSAs into water quality.
Good luck with
The-
the politics of
Yeah,
that one, Carl.
the GSA is going to be at the minimum some sort of clearinghouse when it comes to water quality.
Right.
We're gonna be doing sampling, the monitoring. We're going to be, if it's a CV salt issue, we're going to be the person that directs them to that. And they really want us to be the stopgap between those timelines and, because Sigma's now, and some of those timelines are later on.
Right.
And I don't know about that yet, but we're gonna end up being the quality.
Me and Carlos, some of the discussions we've had at the baby salt level was, these people want a freebie, but they ought to at least pay what the people in the city are paying. That system ends up costing more, maybe you subsidize that system, but they should at least be on par with somebody else, that's living in the city on one of those systems.
Right now, the state board or the appropriate regulatory agency wants to
Push it on
the
that.
GSA.
Yeah.
And I would refer you guys to some of the board policies that they state numerous times in this document. So they're not even expecting that all of our rules will be applied across the board. So you may have to carve out exceptions for some of our rules. Well, I'm not looking at you anymore. When you're not smiling, it makes me nervous. All right.
Now we're gonna be mandated to pick winners and losers.
Yeah, that's right, pretty much.
Okay, I think I only have one last slide. Oh, good. And you guys are good too. You guys are like, yeah, we're not supposed to talk anymore. Okay, so a couple of additional recommendations that were in the document. One is, if you're familiar with Sigma, there is a good actor provision. So, for example, if your particular GSA is meeting the requirements of Sigma, is in compliance, but other portions of the subbasin may not be, you can apply for what they call a good actor, using a colloquial term, exemption. And the state board staff, in this case, recommended that that the entire subbasin be placed into probation and no area be excluded. And then the second additional recommendation was the installation of measuring devices, which is meters. And they basically want everyone who reports, or excuse me, who pumps more than 2 acre-feet to sign up into their new years program, and report groundwater extraction and there will be fees attached to that of $40 an acre-foot. They do require meters, that they recommend that meters be required for anyone pumping more than 500 acre-feet per year. And those that are de minimis users below 2 acre-feet be exempt from the program. So those are the recommendations of about, like I said, 176 pages. We went through it. It probably didn't feel very fast to you, but trust me, if you were reading the whole thing, that was a quick, short exemption, or summary of it, I should say. Questions that I can answer for any of you? I know it was a lot. It was a fire hose for some of you that aren't living and breathing Sigma like the rest of us.
This is Roger. I have some questions.
Sure.
Now, first of all, thank you for letting me join your meeting. Appreciate that. Secondly, I want you to know that Deanna and Stacy are two of the nicest people in the world to deal with. And from day one, I love them. They're the antithesis of the woman I have to deal with up here that has prevented me from selling my water. But just as background, I was given a tax donation of 529 acres called the Allensworth Conservation Land at the end of 2021. And the intent in taking it was because of the collateral value. I had a manufacturing company making shelters for the homeless and affordable housing. And I was fully aware of what was required of me to preserve and protect this conservation land in perpetuity, which really is nothing. They haven't used any water in 15 years. About the only management issue is repairing the fences when people encroach with their cattle. There hasn't been much to eat anyway. I got the land from my brother's company and they were in the cattle business, but in 15 years, they said there was never any economic justification for bringing in cattle. But in any event, I immediately had offers from people that had orchards that needed more water. That would have kept my manufacturing company going. And there's a little clause in the contract that said I needed permission from Wildlife Heritage Foundation, the land trust that oversees this. And the gal in charge, I think for totally unjust reasons, said no. And we've been in that battle now for almost 2 years at tremendous expense. In the meantime, the manufacturing operation has been shut down. Been very costly for me personally. But anyway, aside from all of that, I would like clarification. I now have somebody that's interested in buying the sustainable yield. And we have 1,163.82 acre feet of water. Now, my understanding is that that can only be used on an annual basis of 232 acre feet. But the total quantity doesn't go away at the end of this 5-year period. Am I correct on that?
Yes, the current policy, Roger, is that we only allow a transfer of 1-year credits. And there were a couple reasons for that. One is because, as you hear, we're still developing policy and the state has not approved our plan yet. We don't know what that's going to mean to these allocations that we've given to land over time. and we may have to change our allocation over time. So that was the reasoning behind one year pumping or sustainability credits being able to be transferred. And I'm sorry, what was the other part of your question?
Well, so
Oh,
we're,
yes, it does roll over. Yes, it's not going to leave your account. It does roll over.
that does roll over, okay. And right now, because of the probation, there's uncertainty as to how much, water would be available after this 5-year period. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. The initial allocation was 0.44 per acre, and that may change in the next 5-year allocation. We will have to, which we made in January of 2026. We may change the policy and how we developed that sustainable yield, and it may change due to the revisions with the state. So we don't know what that number is going to be yet.
Okay, but it won't be zero, correct?
It won't be zero. It won't be zero. That's right. As long as our allocation program is still in place and viable, you'll receive another 5-year allocation of sustainable yield.
Okay. And, because orchards last a long time, presumably that, program will continue in the future, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Just another quick question, about managing demand. Out of all of this, property, I have 9.8 acres that's not encumbered by the, easement. And the question is, what can you do with 9.8 acres? I had a squatter on there, and I kicked her off, and then the next week I had 5 more squatters. So my belief is that it needs to be planted, and hopefully that would solve that problem. But if by 10 acres it isn't a lot of land, and it's not going to take a lot of water. But the other thing I was looking at, and this would be subject to Tulare County putting a little water in their wine on the zoning issues. I have 2 companies in Uganda. I didn't mean to, but sometimes things happen, and I have a background in international trade, and we're engaged in affordable housing and food security in Uganda. And affordability means something different there, obviously, because of the income levels. But I have been focused for a long time on hydroponic farming, because you can only use 5 or 10% of the water, and you can produce more food year round. So one of the possibilities on the 9 acres was to create kind of an exhibition farm village where we could have housing for ag workers, but we would focus on hydroponic farming. And since Tulare is big in the agricultural world, and it could tie in with the Ag Expo every year, but I don't know, on the 9.8 acres, and I might add that I'm 84 years old, so I'm planning to live forever. But in case God has a different plan, I'd like to put this in the hands of somebody that can do something with it. But 10 acres, even for a vineyard or pistachios or anything, that wouldn't use a whole lot of water. But if you're trying to limit the demand for water, is it desirable not to go down that route?
Roger, that question's hard for us to answer for you. That's really got to be a personal decision, and you just have to look at the water credits you have available to you, and the cost of developing the agricultural well, which it's not, that's a costly endeavor in and of itself. But that's a financial decision, and that's why we give the landowners their allocation, and they can make those financial decisions. They know what's available to them. So yeah, that's hard for
Okay.
me to answer. I'm sorry. I wish I could tell you whether that would be a good idea or not. It just, that's,
Roger, where is your property, where's that 9 acres located?
It's on, Avenue 24. You know where that is? Just south of Early Mark. It's about
Oh,
2.5
okay.
miles west of Highway 99.
Wildlands or remember that name?
Yeah, with the one, yeah. Yeah.
Hey, Roger, is there a source of, surface water in the area that you could use for recharge? Could you turn it into 10 acres of recharge?
I don't think there's any source of water. We do have a
Yeah.
capped well on the 9.8 acres. But no, I haven't seen any water.
Yeah,
So,
You know, selling your allocation and credits is probably going to be your best, your best solution. And I think I've told you this
Mhm.
before. I think if you knew exactly where the credits were going to go, we could probably do it. We could probably bring that before the board and do the credit transfer up to the end of the 5-year period. So that would be the current credits you have now could be transferred, but it wouldn't be something that would be in perpetuity.
Yeah, he's under a land trust agreement, so it'd be interesting to see, Roger, what your land trust agreement, states. I'm on the land trust board, Susan's the Thule Trust, we're a newly formed land trust. And maybe we could, I'm not offering up Susan, but she's got a lot of experience, and maybe we could just take a look at your agreement, 'cause it sounds like they're telling you cannot sell your water. Is that correct? Where you have the easement? Yeah.
Well,
So we could
there's
maybe-
a little clause. There's a little clause in the easement document that says they have a right to withhold my ability to transfer the water that has been historically used or is pertinent to the conservation easement. And in 15 years, they haven't used any water. Agriculture is prohibited in perpetuity. And the only reason I was given in the beginning was we need the water for grazing animals. And they've never used any for grazing animals. And and we've got 4 different parcels that are not contiguous. I have a couple of biologists going out there this week to look at it, but I think mowing is an alternative to having cattle. But there's different issues with grazing animals, I guess. But you happen to know Darla Gunsler?
I don't. Do you, Susan? No. I understand that land trust is out of
She's the
Lincoln.
director of.
Yeah, I looked it up real quickly.
Roger, what's the nearest crossroad? You said Avenue 24, and it's, what, did you say east or west of 99?
It's west, about 2.5
West.
miles.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm assuming you're right close to the Allensworth Ecological Reserve.
Yeah, that's what it looks like.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I've tried to be reasonable. We've tried to have a meeting at the table. We've invited the board or board members to meet, to no avail. So I'm at a point where we can't work this out. I'm going to have to seek a declaratory judgment. But I also had a right to terminate my agreement with them and assign it to another land trust. And we have one that is amenable to transfer the water, but it's not helping anybody. You got orchard owners that need water, and I like to think we were doing good things by trying to help people with. We got 171,000 homeless people in California, and we had a good thing going, but it's tough the first 2 years of business. And I spent about $500,000 on the first year, and we lost our lease. I had another place to go, but basically it just shut us down. So anyway, maybe the new year will bring good things, but if we can do something with what we've got, it would be very helpful. So
Roger,
if we can help with,
Kathy, one of our consultants here in the room, she's gonna take a look at it and, see if she can come up with something that would be helpful to you.
that'd be wonderful. Appreciate it.
Okay.
All right. Well, thanks for letting me join your meeting, and I wish you luck with your little problem here. Not gonna get much sleep in the next 6
Nice to see you in person, Roger, or almost in person, virtually, not on the phone.
Yeah. Good to see you guys. Thank you. Thank you again for all your help.
Well, let's take a look at.
All right, we are at 3:30. Yeah, do you have anything else? I think we covered this in detail, probably in excruciating detail. All right then, our next meeting, just to wrap up our agenda, there's a board meeting on November 2nd. And again, if you keep in mind, the first workshop that I mentioned is November 3rd. Then the in-person meeting workshop is on November 8th, and Susan's workshop is on November 9th. So I wasn't kidding when I said there's a whole bunch of stuff coming down. And then our next advisory committee meeting is November 20th at 1 o'clock, which is also a different time than our board.
We changed dates because it's right for
That's
Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving, so we're doing it on the Monday.
We're moving it up to Monday instead of Wednesday.
Already?
That,
Wow.
Dang.
Don't forget Halloween.
Yeah, Halloween's in a week.
Yeah, it's coming right up.
Yes,
Man, I am way off.
We
This
moved
year is going.
moved it up to Monday, and
It
at
is.
that meeting, we should have a recharge policy to reconsider, I
Yes.
would think.
Yes, we
Okay.
will. In fact, I'm glad you said that, because that was a note I made to myself to make sure we mentioned that. All right. In that case, thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time. Have a nice rest of your day. Thanks. Take care. We'll see you on hopefully the November 2nd meeting.